This session is going to discuss Signal and the economy it operates in, and the next session is going to be about AI and the economy of AI. What we're going to discuss roughly is what is Signal, and apart from the app, what is the sustenance of Signal, how does it operate, what kind of economy does it operate in, the constraints that the larger tech economy places on the operations of an organization and an app like Signal. We're going to look at surveillance and encryption and how to think about those issues. Okay? And after that, obviously, I'm sure there are going to be a lot of interesting questions. We will get through those. So over to Meredith.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Is the mic working? Wonderful. Well, first, I want to thank everyone for hosting me. I want to thank Hasgeek and the center. It's a real honor to be here. And my bias here is toward hearing more from you, so I will try to keep my short remarks quick and then open it up for questions. So how many people here know what Signal is, by a show of hands? Okay, this is an unusual room, but it's really nice to see. For those who don't, I'm just going to give the little tweet-sized description. We're the world's most widely used, truly private messaging app. So we go to great lengths to make sure we know as little as possible, and the only people who know who you're communicating with and what you're communicating are you and the people you're speaking with. So in our sort of value set, we are striving to preserve the norm of private communication that existed for hundreds of thousands of years before the development of networked infrastructure and then the commercialization of that networked infrastructure in the 90s, which birthed the surveillance business model. So monetizing data for advertising, now monetizing data for AI, is the engine of the tech economy. And we are striving to do something that is rowing upstream against the dominant business model of tech, which is monetizing surveillance. So we have one singular focus, and that's ensuring that norm of privacy can translate into digital space. And so we have developed novel technical approaches to do this. We developed the Signal protocol, which was a major step forward in terms of applied cryptography. If we think about sort of cryptographic history, this was released in 2013, authored by Moxie Marlinspike, who is Signal's founder, and Trevor Perrin, who is an esteemed cryptographer. And since 2013, that protocol has been used by many other different messaging apps. So it is, what I call the gold standard of messaging encryption. It is used by WhatsApp, it is used by Google, it's licensed by Twitter, although I don't think they use it, and it sort of set the bar for messaging privacy. And that's what we use to encrypt the contents of our communication. So if we are communicating and I say, hey, I want, where are you going for dinner? And he says, well, we're going here, meet us. Only we know what is said. No one who is intercepting that, no one who has access to the servers, all they'll see is a blob of encrypted nonsense that cannot be deciphered. And that includes Signal. Signal, if you came to us with a gun and you said, give us your data, we would have to say, shoot, because we cannot give the data, because we treat ourselves as a third party and thus try to prevent ourselves from accessing your communication. We have also developed novel cryptographic techniques on top of the Signal protocol. So the Signal protocol protects the communications, the content of what you're saying. But of course, in the age of large data sets, in the age of powerful inferential systems, metadata matters more and more and can say a lot about you. So we also encrypt your profile name, your profile photo, who is in your groups, who you're talking to. So, if asked to give up details about your sort of intimate communications, your network, we cannot do that either. And this is what really sets the bar, or what makes Signal the bar setter for privacy, because there is no other private messaging app that is used at the scale Signal is used that actually protects metadata. So that is, I think, a really critical difference between, say, Signal and WhatsApp. So, why do we care about privacy? I guess that is a question that we can, explore because it continually comes up. It's this abstract value, privacy, right? We want privacy, and then it's like, well, but we need to know there are bad people, there are demons, there are monsters. We have to understand what they're doing, or we can't, protect the world. And so I don't know, in this room, I imagine the folks who are drawn to a talk like this might also be sympathetic to a cause of privacy, but I'd be interested, how many people think privacy is very important to them? Well, I probably don't have to go through this part then, making the case for privacy. But I do think I'll just do it for a moment, because I think in an environment that is so polarized right now, in an environment where, frankly, globally, Signal is facing pretty vitriolic attacks against the right to digital privacy, which translates to privacy overall, because our lives are cataloged and surveilled digitally. It makes sense to sort of dwell on this for a moment. So we can do like a guided meditation. If you want to close your eyes and imagine your entire inboxes, just everything you've ever sent. You started that Gmail account back in 2003, say, when you got an invite code. Remember when they had those? And you've emailed people, you've gone through breakups, you've, talked some nonsense about people you wish you hadn't said, you've, purchased things, you've had receipts delivered there, everything, right? It's just in there as kind of a trash bin of your past. Now imagine that being exposed to everyone you know. Your in-laws, your bosses, your coworker. So you're a manager, right? So all the people you manage are suddenly going through all of your intimate, like you talk some, whatever there, and they're able to rifle through that, right? Like think about, everyone in here is a great person. Like how many people would you have to explain to? How many friendships would you have left if everyone could rifle through every moment of your life, all of these traces? And then imagine the kind of leverage a boss or the security services or someone else would have, accessing that, realizing your vulnerabilities, and being able to leverage that for manipulation, leverage that to make decisions about what kind of person you are, where do you fit in the social order. So I think what I'm getting at here is not just as sort of a fun example to try to convince you privacy is important. I think most of you are convinced, but kind of trying to make more material, like make more real in our lived realities about like privacy is actually about power and power relationships. And one of the ways those who have power ensure their power and secure their power is through developing an advantage in information asymmetry. So the more information you have about those you govern or oppress, those you oversee, the more you can control them. And this is, this goes back well before digital computing. You can look at the rise of state statistics. You can look at the rise of sort of, early databases. You can look at Stasi dossiers. You can look at all of the ways that regimes, corporations and others have worked to develop systems of knowledge and information and surveillance over their subjects, whether those subjects are called employees or citizens or what have you. So this is really, really fundamental to the ability to, participate in a meaningful democracy, to the ability to organize, to the ability to have an independent union, to the ability to have intimate conversations with the people you love and the people you're frustrated with, to the ability to name things that disappoint you in the world, corruption, things that you want to change, and actually, set about honestly changing those, right? And so I think, in some sense, we are now in a world where surveillance is so normalized that privacy seems aberrant, but nonetheless, privacy is fundamentally necessary if we're going to have a livable future. And I think we don't have to point far to find examples. How are we going to push back against the forces that would will us into climate disaster or are willing us into climate disaster without the ability to speak to each other? How are we going to sort of contend with a very complex and unequal world without privacy? So, that's a little bit, that is my pitch in a sense, but it's also why I do this work, right? Why I'm not at a big tech company leaving at 3 every day. Because I really think that the world with Signal and with more privacy and private communications, we have a much better chance of shaping a livable world than a world in which a handful of corporations, largely based in the US and China, have inordinate power over our lives and institutions across the globe because they have developed these surveillance capabilities and these surveillance infrastructures that are now infiltrating our lives and political and economic institutions. And that gets me to the point of sustainability. Like, how does Signal do this? What kind of a beast is Signal? Signal is a 501c3 nonprofit, and I don't know how well that translates to the Indian context, but that's a sort of, an incorporation, in the U.S. where you agree not to take, profits. You get revenue. You can get revenue, but you're, not for profit, and you have kind of a charitable aim. And that requires that you do certain transparency protocols. So there's sort of forms we file that show our finances. That also means that we don't take sort of investment in the classic venture capitalist sense, and that we cannot be acquired. We could be acquired, but the executives and the board would not get a payout. So if we sold Signal for billions of dollars to, say, Palantir or something evil like that, we would have to reinvest that money in charitable causes. Now, why is our incorporation structure important? Well, it's actually one of the key barriers or key protections, I would say like a rampart, that allows us to keep fully focused on our mission of providing meaningful private communications. And in tech, that is particularly important because the barrier we're protecting against is the fact that the business model in tech is monetizing surveillance. So if we had investors, if we had limited partners breathing down our neck, if we had shareholders who were sort of hassling that one old guy on our board about increasing revenues or growth, or this doesn't look too good, the privacy thing, that seems a little dated, we're not getting the kind of growth we need, we would be pushed to compromise our privacy focus because the money lies in surveillance. And so actually the structure of Signal is, I wouldn't say as important as the fact that all our code is open source, it's all tested, the protocol has been hammered over and over again, but it is right up there, right? It's one of the things that allows us to say, no, we're not, we are not compromising on our values of privacy. We are, staying true to these, and we don't actually care if that means leaving money on the table, because that money in the tech ecosystem, either you're monetizing surveillance or you're providing services and infrastructure to those who do. But that is the engine at the heart of the tech business model. So we are donation-based, and we're donation-based with a little caveat. We had a big investment from the co-founder of WhatsApp, Brian Acton, who built WhatsApp along with his co-founder, sold it to Meta, and then left early because he was so disappointed in what he saw as Meta breaking their privacy promises that they had made during the acquisition process. So he saw firsthand what happens when you sort of enter the belly of the surveillance beast, and that led him to invest in Signal and provide us with an on-ramp, that allows us to work on developing a more sustainable revenue model that is outside of the surveillance business model. So our hope, and one of the things that I'm very focused on right now, is that we can become increasingly supported by the people who use Signal. Now, we're lucky because we have a lot of users. We have many, many millions of users. And so just a small percentage of that many, many millions of users can help sustain us. But I also want to emphasize something that I think will be probably really familiar to people in this room, but is not part of the popular narrative of tech, right? When we think of tech, we don't think of what is the economic engine of tech, but it's, surveillance is incredibly profitable, and building tech is incredibly expensive. So it costs tens of millions of dollars a year just to develop and maintain Signal, right? That's our bandwidth, that's our hosting cost, that's our registration cost, that's maintaining XYZ service, and that is hiring the engineers we need across 3 different client teams. So every time iOS has an update, our team has to sort of do some maintenance on Signal to make sure we're not broken. We have to have the guy who communicates with Apple and waits for the sort of decision from above about App Store compliance with every new feature we launch. We have Android, similar. We have the desktop team, we have a core libraries team, and a calling. So for the video and voice calls, that's an entirely separate team. And then we have a support team and a number of others. But total, we're only about 45 people. So we're incredibly small. Given I think Meta has like 70 or 80,000 employees total. WhatsApp has tens of thousands if you count contractors. So we're incredibly small. We punch way above our weight. But what we're doing is sort of trying to build a model that doesn't quite exist now. And we're trying to build this model because we think signal, a world with signal is diametrically different than a world without signal. And we know that you could not rebuild signal right now. I could launch a perfect encrypted app, and because no one uses it and the market is saturated, it doesn't quite matter. The fact that Signal has been around for so long, that the protocol is tried and tested, that we already have a network effect in so many places, means that Signal works in a way that a new entrant could not. And so we think of this as kind of a jewel we have to protect, not as something that's an experiment that can go wrong and we can start over. So I think I'm gonna end it around there. I think that's most of what I wanted to kind of frame the conversation around, and I know there are many people who are very, familiar with Signal, very technically conversant, so I know there's gonna be a lot of really good questions here, but I hope that gives you an introduction to, what we're about, who we are, why I'm so passionate about this, and kind of the political economy within which Signal is situated, which can give you a better sense of Signal, and I hope prompt some really good questions that will be really informative to us as well. I'll also say that we are in an environment that is very, very hostile to encryption and privacy right now. So we have been fighting in the UK and in Europe. There are some very fierce and misguided laws that have the potential to set a precedent globally for eliminating the possibility for end-to-end encryption. So that's one of the reasons we're meeting with so many people who are invested in privacy, understand the dangers at a technological and social level of undermining end-to-end encryption, is because we really want to connect with the other people who are doing this work, who are thinking these things, who are developing these analysis outside of our institution, because we think we're going to need to, we know that we're going to need to collaborate with each other, share knowledge, and work together if we're going to ensure that privacy sustains into the future. So I'll end it there. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so I have a bunch of questions that I think are some of the more common questions that we're going to have in this room. We also have two more people from Signal who will be here for the Q&A. Josh Lund and Jun Harara. Would you like to join us?
Yeah, if you want to. And these are my teammates who are also here with me, and we'll just, if I don't know the answer immediately, they can answer, but we're all here to make sure we give good information.
Yeah. Yeah, one on that side. Yeah. We may have to move closer just to make sure we're in the frame. So I'll start off with, I think one of the more common questions that comes up. Why is Signal structured as a centralized application where there's only one organization providing the service? Why is it not decentralized the way email is? And a lot of people will cite something like Matrix and say, look, that's a decentralized system. Why is Signal not like that? Okay, so let's maybe start with that. Why is Signal centralized? What is the requirement that sets it up that it works better as a centralized service?
I can start on that. I think, there's kind of a joke answer where I'm like, how many people have rolled out PGP, right? In a sense, like email is decentralized. It's also incredibly insecure. Like 80% of the Proton accounts go through Gmail anyway. One of the issues is decentralization does not often promote the kind of collaborative consensus that is required for encryption. Because of course, encryption needs to operate on every end. That is not the reason, though. I think we don't have any examples of highly secure, high availability, high use, decentralized infrastructures. I think Mastodon maybe, but that's a that's a
It's very early stage, and we don't know if it will work at scale.
Exactly. So, our focus at Signal is on, making sure people can communicate privately. Anyone, anywhere can pick up their device and use Signal to communicate with anyone else privately with no worries, right? And so that is also like a very human-centered approach. What we're not trying to do is prove a proof of concept or sort of develop a novel, consensus architecture for decentralized updates. When Signal started, and we don't, there's many dates. 2013 is one, but there's also, the late 2000s when there was Text Secure and Red Phone. There have been many sort of iterations of Signal. The real purpose was let's provide this for people so they can, have these privacy affordances. Now, in the period from then to now, what we've seen is a centralization of infrastructure. So no high availability service that I'm aware of hosts their own infrastructure. If Signal were going to host our own, we would be talking about hundreds of millions of dollars a year. That's electricity. That is, paying the SREs who carry the pager to go drain the buffer in some data center that's overflowing. That's an entire apparatus that at this point is realistically only available to, only done by a handful of companies. And these are kind of the winners of the surveillance business model who built this up during that time. Given the dynamics of natural monopoly that communication infrastructures demonstrate. So, I imagine there's a lot of startup folks in here. I imagine most of you run on AWS or Azure, maybe Google Cloud and Apache network of others, but that's because no one deploys their own servers anymore. Now, we could say, we want a decentralized architecture, right? So that means hey, after this, let's all get in a club and we all agree we're gonna sort of, per this protocol, we're going to sort of host a Signal server. Right? But we can't, if we are people focused, if we want to make sure that person picking up their phone in an emergency can quickly get to someone else, we can't rely on volunteer labor, right? We can go into the sort of open source movement, but let's be clear, the open source movement doesn't rely on volunteer labor. It relies on Google paying for contributors and many other, there's a sort of infrastructure to that is not free. And I think with decentralization, we would need to ensure that we had the same robust coverage in every area of the world that we are able to get with the type of hosting that is now provided as a norm by the large players. I also want to mention decentralization doesn't mean it's cost-free. It still costs every person who is, or every organization that is hosting these servers. And that also means that decentralized infrastructures or using a decentralized protocol that lets anyone sort of join and participate does not ensure decentralized power. We have private equity firms right now sort of trying to buy up Mastodon instances, right? And I think, we have the Winklevoss twins, owning half the Bitcoin mining operations, right? So I think we need to scratch the surface a bit on what exactly do we want from decentralization? Are we talking about governance? Are we talking about sort of infrastructure? What type of robustness does that ensure? What type of problems does it create? One of the other problems I want to mention quickly is how do you update a security? Once you've found a sort of vulnerability, how do you update a security patch? That's actually a huge one, right? How do you, there's some library we use, right? That there's a bug, it gets reported. We need to sort of quickly patch that. Whatever the patch is that they shipped, we can do that in an hour, maybe less. If we had to sort of try to get a sort of decentralized consensus to patch that everywhere, we know that there is no good process right now for doing that. And again, that is being kind of human focused. We don't want to leave a section of Signal users vulnerable because the people who are hosting those servers are on vacation or the organization restructured and that's no longer a priority. So again, it's sort of, for us, it's about practicality and it's about how do we operate in a tech industry ecosystem that sadly has consolidated over the last 20 years. But in the 10 years, you've seen self-hosting become kind of a novel quirk as opposed to a norm. And how do we operate and provide a service that, to a user's perspective, works as well as WhatsApp, works as well as the alternatives without thinking, is very intuitive, is just on. You don't have to wait for it to sort of warm up, or you don't have to choose another instance or something that is deeply confusing to people who have there are norms and expectations set by surveillance technologies that, aren't signal, but nonetheless rely on the same affordances. Okay, I think that's my answer.
Right. So, which I think then gets us the next thing, it's like one of the reasons you want decentralization is because you want to say, I don't have to know that I can trust this entity because I have the choice of some other entity that I feel better trusting on. And so then the question is going to be, how do you know you can trust Signal? It's like if Signal says it's a secure app and Telegram says it's a secure app, it's like one of those claims is not true. But the thing is that how do you know? Like how do you know which one of them is the safe one? So I guess, yeah, so that actually, leads into multiple sub-questions, which we'll get to. But let's start with this. It's like, how do you prove that you do what you say you do?
Well, one, I don't think everyone should just trust us because we seem nice, right? Like, you're not trusting us based on some, you're not like pulling a tarot card and being like, trustworthy, right? Like, Telegram is not open source. Telegram routinely cooperates with governments. Telegram, you decompile the client and you see how bad their data handling is. Encryption is an opt-in feature for one-to-one chats only. Telegram talks a big game, and sadly people get confused by their talk. But, Signal is not asking for people to trust us as an institution. Signal treats ourselves as a third party. Right? So, there's actually not much you would get from sort of coming to my house and trying to sort of, get into Signal because all of our code is open source. The protocol is openly documented with open implementations available for reuse. It's all licensed permissively. And there are people who are like train spotters for Signal pull requests, right? When we merge a new branch, there's like people in our Reddit, it's very lively Reddit group, by the way, who sort of go over it, make inferences based on, looks like usernames is coming along or what have you. And there's sort of an active community that is, a bit like an immune system there. So they will call us out if they don't like, the fact that we shipped, with something or another. We'll get sort of, bug reports from that. So it's, Signal, the code is very open. Our protocol is open. And so, we're actually not asking for trust. Now, you don't have to like me. You don't have to like the people who work there. But, the app itself is not actually asking you to trust it. It's saying, here's what we do. You can look at what we do. If you find that we're doing something different, report it as a bug. But, we're not, we're working in the open. And we are sort of, I think, proving the validity of our claims in a way that Telegram isn't.
Yeah. So this slightly technical version of this question, I think Josh, you may be a better person to answer this. One of the ways that if you look at say, how do I know that Signal's servers run the same software that they publish as their open source code? And Signal's founder Moxie had published his theory of an interesting way to solve the problem using DRM. And if you say, look at Netflix, when you play Netflix in your browser, it actually uses DRM to confirm that you're not pirating the video, you're just watching it. And it's now a hardware feature that CPUs have that essentially say that this code has been trusted and the code has not been modified when it's running, and the code is coming from a third party. And so what Moxie had said is, hey, why don't we turn this around and say, can we use DRM to prove that the server is running the software that you think it's supposed to be running, and that therefore exactly what the code is doing. It's not different code running on the server. I'm not sure what the current state of that implementation is. So, Josh, if you have any insight on that.
Do you want to say something first?
Oh, you should answer it. Yeah,
Okay.
You were asked.
Yeah, I guess. So you're talking about remote attestation. That is used for some of Signal services. But the heart of the protection is the end-to-end encryption, which by definition is happening on the clients, which are open source. We have reproducible builds on Android, so you can actually build an APK that is the same as the build that you download from the Play Store, if people want to verify that. But with the service itself, because everything is end-to-end encrypted, there's not very much that the service can do that would be malicious. The integrity is all in the clients and cryptographically guaranteed. So a malicious server is not really a threat model for Signal in the same way that it might be for other messaging apps where the server is the client and everything on the server is plain text. And I think, you probably can infer who I'm talking about with that one, but it's Telegram. So Signal doesn't have anything sensitive on its servers. And the other thing that, I could say, and Meredith could go into more detail about this, this is a claim that has been tested in court. You can go to signal.org/bigbrother. You can see the requests that we've received, and you can see the way that we've responded to those requests. And the amount of information that we've been able to turn over is extraordinarily limited. It's limited to when somebody registered for the service and the last time they connected to the service. So this is not, some kind of academic distinction. People have asked for information, and we've been unable to turn over that information.
Yeah, attestation is now becoming also remote attestation. It's, a feature that's being deployed as more and more enterprises want to use that on, these distributed cloud this cloud infrastructure, right? Because no one runs their own thing, but people do need, the financial sector and, the intelligence community, whatever, are asking for that level of assurance. So we should probably see more of that. But I think the point that Josh is sort of pointing at is we don't trust, our hosts either, right? What they have is a big ball of, encrypted nonsense that they can't make use of, right? Everything we do is sort of on the client, and that means that, we can host on AWS. And we can sort of deploy to AWS, but we're not giving them any privileged information that either Amazon, or our server code could exploit. So, I think there's clever technical ways to do that, but ultimately this is about trustless, deployment, because we are in an environment where we can't provide a high availability service without using cloud infrastructure, and we cannot provide a private service without, refusing to trust that infrastructure.
Okay, so do we have an audience question? You'll have to use the mic, unfortunately, because otherwise it won't be recorded.
Yeah. Thanks for this wonderful stuff that you spoke about. My question is, in this world which is dominated by governments, which want, where we have a lot of bad actors as well, and there is always a requirement for a trapdoor that governments are demanding so that they can either monitor these back, and this is a fact of the matter. So how do you operate in an environment where almost every government in the world will require via some kind of a legislation? They do require via various other apps to do it. So how are you able to circumvent that? Because they are going to ask, something goes wrong tomorrow and some bad actors use your app to do something really bad, and people want to reproduce that. I mean, how do you have explainability around that?
So Meredith actually had a big victory in the UK, a policy victory, which maybe you want to give a background?
We can tag on that.
Anish, one more here.
So I did see about, you're talking about being forced to leave countries in case of, anti-privacy legislation. But, we are your users or your community base, right? So how do we continue to be able to use your service when we are, under the surveillance of authoritarian government? So how are you going to make that work? Like, instead of withdrawing or, leaving?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I'll sort of combine the answers to this, because I think, I appreciate the opportunity to clarify here, because our position has always been we will never implement a backdoor, full stop. Encryption either works for everyone or it's broken for everyone. And getting that through to people who are unwilling to understand it is difficult, but it is no less true. So our position is, if it came down to the choice between being forced to implement a backdoor, which we will not do, or leave, we would leave. But we're not looking to leave. We're not looking to leave anywhere. We stand with the people, all of whom deserve the human right to privacy, irrespective of whichever regime is operating at the time. So in the UK, for instance, if it did come down to Ofcom, who is the regulator who has now been given the power to mandate what is essentially a backdoor, whether they'll use it or not is a another complex question. But if we were, it came down to that type of mandate, we would set up proxy servers to make sure that the people in the UK could continue to access Signal. We would, try other circumvention techniques. We would do everything we could up to the point of leaving. Now, how do we make this case? We make it together, right? We need more than Signal making this case. We need a broader understanding about the human right to privacy and just how significant it would be to perturb the handful of robust crypto systems we have that can actually ensure privacy. So to backdoor the Signal protocol or what have you. Another kind of thought exercise. So imagine I am the security service, right? And I go to, I have a pen. I'm just going to use this as a prop, right? I have a pen, and I go to the pen manufacturer. Let's say it's Bic, right? And I say, I need to know everything ever written with this pen now. And the pen manufacturers, are you out of your mind? Like, what are you smoking? This is not how pens work. Like, why on earth would you, come with this to us? You have other techniques, right? I mean, it's sort of similar to Signal, right? Like, Signal doesn't work that way, and we could not change it to work that way without undermining the entire point of why we exist, right? So I think, with the example of the pen, that also gets into some, why are we so willing to assume everything that touches computational infrastructure should suddenly turn into a surveillance vehicle for corporations and states, right? Like, why is that the norm that we have to argue against instead of the other way around? How did we let that out of the barn in the late 90s and allow it to become normalized without more discussion about how, frankly, perverse it is that our entire lives are now subject to commodification and surveillance by corporations and states that run these infrastructures?
I have a quick question over here. So you had an interview with Nilay Patel for the Decoder podcast. I heard it right after it came out, and I remember a very peculiar line which caught me over there. And he was saying, when it comes down to that scenario, Signal would walk out of any particular place which forces you to break encryption. If it comes down to that, what choice will the people have? If you're forced to walk out, and the people really do need such services for private communication, what does it leave the people with?
I don't want to play out, look, we will not walk out unless we are forced to, right? Like, I would, and by forced to, I mean a hypothetical example we haven't faced yet. Like, we will, we in Iran, when they blocked Signal, we, worked overnight to set up proxy servers to, be in contact with people who were in contact with people in Iran to see what we could do to continue to get people access to Signal, right? But in some cases, I think, this sort of walkout scenario that, journalists really love that dichotomy, like, would you throw down your toys and would you leave, right? Like, it's obviously not going to be that simple. We're talking about, like, okay, there's a escalating brinksmanship. There is sort of increasing pressure. There is, what happens with the gatekeepers, right? This is one of the issues of operating within such a concentrated market. There are two app stores that matter. We can say run an APK, but let's be real, like, my dad's not gonna run an APK and I need to talk to my dad, right? So, like, there are a lot of things that would be likely to happen that would not be Signal's choice when it comes down to that. But what's important is we will never implement a backdoor, right? We only exist to provide a meaningful means of private communication, and so we're not going to perturb that. So, if it came down to being kicked off the app stores, et cetera, there are a lot of scenarios, but I think it gets sort of simplified into Signal sort of taking kind of moral high ground that leaves people stranded. And we would, we'll do everything we can not to leave people stranded.
One comment also on this, so if you take the Indian scenario, where you say there's a threat of Signal being banned because there's an encryption requirement, or there's a ban on encryption, or there's a backdoor requirement, or there's a verified identity requirement, or a metadata requirement. There's a lot of threats that are currently being floated around by the Indian government. The interesting thing is the lawmakers. Turned out that Pegasus used WhatsApp to break phones of various people around the country. They've all moved WhatsApp to Signal. Okay? And you'll find that in particular when you're dealing with members of parliament, and for those of us who have in touch with for various reasons, WhatsApp anymore. You can only contact them on Signal. And so if those same people say we are going to ban Signal, you know that would be a very stupid thing for them to do for their own sakes. So you have that safety that the people with the power to make such rules, if they are going to compromise themselves, then they will not make that rule. They will just threaten it. Okay. It's kind of like it's a game of bluff, so you don't know if they will ever actually do it, but you know that it's extremely unlikely that they will do something like that. Okay. So you.
The arguments government make against encryption is about it empowering terrorists. And that argument is supported by very visceral imagery. You see pictures of bombs and broken buildings and dead bodies and blood on the streets. The counter argument tends to have more sort of abstract argument about the general good, and that's it. It finds it hard to compete against that visceral argument. So you meet a lot of regular people who actually support the governmental argument. How do you bring a better balance into that discussion?
I mean, you're speaking my mind, because in some contexts it is terrorism and it is very visceral. In the context of the UK, it is child abuse and pornography. So I've just spent, a number of months having it implied that I support pedophiles. And these are, you're right. I think the imagery is dramatic. It is immediately emotionally evocative. It sort of activates your frontal cortex. And then, I come in and I say, well, math doesn't budge. Like, no one cares, right? And so I do think this is part of why I tried to sort of start with some kind of more emotional kind of thought exercise around like why privacy really matters and how it's so fundamental to, ensuring more fluid power dynamics. But it is very, very difficult, because oftentimes you will make, and you've spent 2 weeks with a number of people revising like clear arguments that, in as plain of language as you can get, make the case that you actually can't break encryption in the way that's desired, that what is being proposed is magical thinking, that is incredibly dangerous to the core infrastructures for communication, that you're introducing a minor vulnerability that will cascade down to be a major vulnerability. You've made all the points that are precise and true, and you have like 8 million citations, and you've had it copy edited. And then you have the Home Office put up a page that says, in fact, what we're asking for is, legitimate, and here are 70 stories of, horrifying abuse that have happened. And by the end of reading that, no one has remembered your arguments, and no one has remembered sort of what is, what we're actually talking about. We're all just feeling like out of breath, like we need to do something about terrorism, like we need to do anything for these children. And so I think, it's an incredibly slimy tactic, and I think one of the reasons, we've pushed back on it before, right? We have the sort of history of the crypto wars. We have, post 9/11 when, surveillance became a national pastime in the U.S. You have, the continual, like any event that happens, any terrorist event or something else is suddenly used as a pretext for a narrative around going dark, and there's a sort of there's like 5 arguments, right? It's like key escrow, okay, we need a front door, we need a side door, we need another kind of back door, right? But they revive over and over again. And so I guess what I'm saying, I don't have a clear answer to that question, but it is a huge problem, and it's something that I think, we're going to have to find better language than sort of just, privacy or the abstractions that try to sort of describe the properties of encryption as sort of brittle math that cannot be perturbed, if we're going to win this fight. I'll also say I don't think we're ever going to win this fight finally, because again, what we're fighting against is a will to power information asymmetry that is central to the constitution of power over other people. And this is not something that's new to tech. This is just a sort of formulation of that struggle. So we will have to, I think we just need to prepare to constantly be pushing back on this and somehow have enough like joy in our community so that we can sustain that fight, because it's not that we're going to win, it's that we're going to hold a line, and that line really, really, really matters for the future.
It's also the flip story of what happened when they actually tried it in the US.
When they Oh, yeah. I mean, that was the crypto wars #1, right? They didn't try it, actually. They proposed it over and over again, and then they privatized it. So the companies just did it in the 2000s instead of, or Microsoft backdoored Outlook. You had RSA doing a backdoor in their RNG. You had sort of, sorry, this gets into some more arcane stuff, but we won permissionless encryption in 1999 in the US when they liberalized, sort of the crypto wars ended. But what we didn't pay attention to as a technical community who was invested in encryption and ostensibly privacy was that exactly the same time, the regulatory framework for commercializing the internet was laid out by the Clinton administration, and that framework allowed companies to surveil without any restriction, so it was self-regulation by the private sector, and endorsed the advertising business model, which of course incentivizes surveillance, because the more information you have about your targets, the more you can advertise precisely to them. And so we kind of let the horse out of the barn, and then the industry that took over the advertising, sort of surveillance advertising business model, then just sort of made deals with the security services in the background.
The recently passed Digital Personal Data Protection Bill has the potential to seriously erode the right to privacy we have in this country through compliance measures for data processors. And a lot of data processors in the country are concerned with these compliance measures as they roll out. Does Signal have similar concerns?
Well, we don't collect any data. So we'll see. But we're not going to sort of perturb our crypto systems or otherwise modify our app to collect more data about people. Our entire goal is to, treat ourselves like a third party who should not be trusted, and to make sure that only the people communicating have that data. So I also don't know the details of this bill, so there may be something in there I should be concerned about, but yeah.
Sorry, I'll come to you. Hi. So I wanted to ask you how resistant Signal is to intrusion that happens not at the level of apps, but at the level of devices that you're using. And even if it's not through your own device, with the aid of devices around you. And therefore, when that happens, what is the recourse available to you with that kind of surveillance?
So we're talking about Pegasus or device
seizure? Yes, any kind of powerful spyware that's, yeah.
I mean, if I suggest using disappearing messages. Disappearing messages, assuming you can trust your operating system, disappearing messages do disappear, and you can't retrieve them. But if someone has your device, they have the ability to do anything you could do on your device. They can listen to your Spotify, they can open your WhatsApp, they can open Signal. One note here is, we are rolling out usernames, which should launch in early 2024. Usernames will make it possible to communicate with anyone on Signal without sharing your phone number. So that will provide a level of privacy on the device, which will be really important. But it's taken us a while to do that because it's actually a major architectural overhaul. So that is, that will be providing a bit more privacy of phone numbers. So you can't enumerate your groups and just see everyone who is in it. But I think device level is sadly mostly out of our control. We do as much as we can, but it's also have caution. If you're using iOS, run lockdown mode. If you're using Google accounts, run their advanced protection. There are things to do, but what I don't want to ever assert is that somehow there's sort of a magic bullet that Signal has to prevent a Pegasus. I think there's a sort of broader threat model and threat model awareness that needs to happen there, and there are certain things Signal can't prevent. But disappearing messages do work, assuming your OS can be trusted, and usernames will help with the ability to enumerate a network from one device, or help prevent that ability. And does that answer your question? Yeah.
Yeah, hi. My question is, maintaining infrastructure and recruiting talent is expensive. And Signal, I think, is structured as a non-profit. Or at least it doesn't charge users for money. It doesn't have WhatsApp like a parent. And I've spoken to the Matrix guys. They have raised venture capital. So what is a sort of your either ideal or a good way of financially securing Signal so that it remains sustainable?
Well, we have generous on-ramp from Brian Acton, which is what we're operating on, part of what we're operating on now. But our goal is to be supported by donations, and donations from, specifically donations from the people who use Signal. That's who we want to be accountable to. And that's also just, for sort of sustainability, what we don't want is to rely on a handful of large donors who could pull out at any moment and leave Signal in a precarious position. So you will see, sometimes you're chatting with people on Signal and there's like a little badge next to their icon. That means that they donated something to Signal, and if you all want to, we would love that. And we also, we're sort of toying with kind of asking for donations more in the app. We also don't want to be annoying or tacky. So we don't want to just have spam saying like, donate to us, like Jimmy Wales crying. So, there isn't a model for donor-supported sort of high availability infrastructure, and we're trying to develop that because we actually don't see another model that would work for Signal, right? If VCs have a lot of control over what you do if you take VC money, and what they want is IPO or acquisition. They're not going to necessarily care if that stems from your privacy commitment or not, right? And again, the business model is monetizing surveillance. So how you satisfy that voracious VC appetite for a high valuation while maintaining privacy is a circle I don't think we've squared yet.
I have a question here, which is, hi, here, back. All right, so I just wanted to take a step back with the assumption that we want innovation from new players with better privacy-preserving structures. And you've spoken about how it's an increasingly hostile environment for these players to find space and grow. But in that context, it would be really interesting to understand your view on what worked for Signal and what were these factors that aligned for Signal to reach the point of benefiting from network effects and such.
Yeah. Well, Signal was started in the early 2010s, ish, which was a very different environment. Like, remember the iPhone launched in 2008, right? Before that, we didn't have smartphones we were carrying around with messengers. Like, our Signal's competition at that time was OTR, Jabber, Google Chat that was happening in the browser. So we're talking about a dramatically different landscape. So Signal was used by sort of, people who were in the know, like it was like me and my cryptographer friends for a long time. It then, we had Snowden in 2013. And Snowden was incredibly important as a moment where, privacy awareness sort of went nuclear, right? Everyone was suddenly like, shit, the paranoids are right. And it did something to the industry, because obviously industry was collaborating very heavily with NSA and other security services, at least in the Western context. But industry did not want that labeled. They did not want to be labeled as spies, right? That was actually a big part of like justifying the surveillance business model, is like, we're trusted, the government is not, the market is trusted, right? And so there was a big effort post Snowden to encrypt things to show that industry was trusted, right? In 2014, the year after Snowden, iOS was encrypted, Android was encrypted. You had Comey, the FBI director, going out like, you're making us go dark. This is horrible, right? There was a move to embrace encryption as a reaction to Snowden, because it was clear that not having encryption was benefiting the NSA, and no one wanted their private communications being sort of sent through to NSA servers. And so in 2014, WhatsApp, this is Brian Acton and Jan Koum, who were the founders, sort of announced that they would be integrating the Signal protocol into WhatsApp. And then in 2016, they sort of finished that. And throughout that time, Signal was gaining users. It was gaining a reputation. When people looked around, they're like, this Snowden stuff is really creepy. How do we sort of protect ourselves? Oh, use Signal, use Signal, use Signal. All the cool kids use Signal. And so, throughout that period, Signal was steadily developing, steadily growing, making design innovations that made it possible to sort of have a seamless but heavily encrypted app. And I think, it's a product of its time, right? It was, certainly innovation. Moxie is a brilliant developer, and there was actually a vision behind it that was incredible, but it was also a product of its time, and we're not in that time anymore. So, communications infrastructures require a network effect, and the markets are saturated. So, everyone uses WhatsApp, you have iMessage and the Apple monopoly, you have other apps that are sort of out there. It's actually, really hard to maintain and grow a position. So I think, recognizing those factors, I don't know, it's not a secret formula that Signal had or like a book we're gonna write and be like, copy our strategy to success. It was sort of, time, place, and vision, and then just like disciplined persistence every day for years and years and years and years.
So there's an expectation and effort on the government side that companies will hand over data, right? And then they're confronted with an app like Signal, which won't do what it wants them to do. So my question is, how does the government actually respond to you? Are they able to understand your vision of privacy, or any government for that matter? And then once they're confronted with it, how do they actually respond to that vision of privacy?
Well, I think that government isn't a monolith. So, there's, but I think you've already heard, governments run on Signal, right? The intelligence service also uses Signal, right? That, there's a privacy for me, but not for thee ethos that is sort of also contained in this. So, we haven't, I don't think we've, and again, we don't, when we are able to fulfill, we do fulfill some requests, right? We get, requests that if they're processed correctly, we will, turn over the data we have, which again is, this phone number, we can affirm that a given phone number is connected to a Signal account. We can affirm when that phone number signed up for Signal, and we can affirm the last time that they accessed their Signal account. But that's all we have, right? And so I think, what we don't get met with often is sort of disbelief, because a lot of the folks in government seem to have some familiarity that Signal is private, even if they don't know the details. But we do get met with sort of requests to figure out how to, fix the system so that it can continue to be private for us, but also give us a backdoor. So there's always that kind of kernel of magical thinking where, whether it's the Washington Post wanting a golden key or, the Clipper chip with a backdoor, there's always this we do know that privacy is important because we need it, but also can you give us a magic wand that will let us break it for them? And so I hope that answered your question, yeah. The government can sort of mail us if we get requests from governments all the time. They come in email, they come in, there's a post office box where you can send those requests and we look at them, but yeah.
Okay, yeah. Sorry, I'm just going to make a quick question. It's slightly a small tangent based on a point you made that Signal doesn't collect any data. So I assume you don't do any kind of A/B testing or in-app telemetry, right?
No.
So
A/B testing maybe by country code. We could do something where it's all the odd numbers get that, all the even numbers get that. But this is let's be really clear. If you've ever worked at one of these companies, that is not considered A/B testing, and we don't have anything that you would consider telemetry data.
So I'm just very interested what kind of inputs you use for new product and new feature development, right? The dominant model in Silicon Valley or other tech companies today is you hoover up all kinds of data on user behavior inside an application, and then based on that you decide what to build next or what to optimize. So would Signal adopt a more qualitative way of gathering user data, or how does that work?
Yeah, we actually have to talk to people.
Yeah.
It's, we're a messaging app. There are standards for messaging apps. We are lucky to have folks who are, leading product and engineering at Signal who have, our director of product has worked on messaging apps for 12 years, right? So he's been through that entire cycle from OTR to, Signal, Line, Kakao, Viber, et al. And so there, we do have just in the team we built, which, we hire very senior, right? It's, anyone we hire should be able to sort of run their own train. And, we have their instinct, honestly, some people, have, kind of a good understanding because they came from some of these companies and, were there knowing what features are popular. We are also investing more in user research, which is just, going out and sort of talking to people, being on the ground, testing the app in low bandwidth settings, seeing does this work, does this not work, feeding that back in. And we also invest in what we call our user voice team, which is sort of a combination of support and research, because that is the interface we have to hear from the people who use Signal. So we have, we don't contract that out. We have in-house people who are sort of dedicated to that and actually meet with each client team each week, meet with the leadership team, and we're sort of, debating these things, and then, we have to sort of combine all of those inputs and combine a theory of change and sort of decide on which features we'll put our limited resources to.
Amazing. Thanks so much.
I think we also have an online question. Should we take that and then come back to the audience? Okay. So the questions that we have got from people watching online is that, one, are we saying WhatsApp's end-to-end encryption is not really private and Signal's is more secure?
I'm saying WhatsApp's end-to-end encryption is partial. It is not as good as Signal's, because while their end-to-end encryption is robust, it only encrypts the contents of your messages. And some of those, in WhatsApp for Business, it actually doesn't in many cases. But on a normal WhatsApp with your friends, it does. So it encrypts what you are saying. It doesn't encrypt metadata. So it knows who you are, who you're saying it to, how often you're saying it, what your profile photo looks like, and a lot of other information that, as James Clapper, former head of the NSA, put it, metadata will get you 80% of the way there, right? So WhatsApp is fundamentally less secure, and I think it also matters that WhatsApp is owned by Meta, which is a surveillance company, and if they wanted, they can take all that metadata. I'm not saying they do. I'm saying if they wanted in the future, they could take all of that and join that with your Facebook data. They could join it with all the data they buy from data brokers. They can get your credit history. They can get all your location history from the telcos, and all of that could become a really detailed and intimate dossier about you. So, Signal is not owned by a surveillance company. We go out of our way to touch as little data as possible, to have as little data as possible. So they are fundamentally different, even though I do believe that, Brian and Jan deciding to encrypt the contents of communication with the Signal protocol in 2014 was one of the biggest privacy wins we've had in the last decade.
One, I think that has already been answered, but can Signal's team guarantee privacy on rooted and jailbroken devices? We've already been through this, but I don't know if you want to summarize again.
Well, if your device is rooted or broken, the person who rooted it can do anything you could do on the device. So run disappearing messages. So we cannot guarantee that. We work within an ecosystem that we do not control, and your threat model should certainly account for that.
Hi, I have a...
Also, maintenance notes, since we're ending at 6:15, we're going to take the last two questions.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for the awesome talk. I learned a lot today, so that was cool. One thing my friends have been asking for is the ability to reply to a message with a sticker directly. That would be really helpful. So that's
noted.
Awesome. So that's the first part. The second thing I have to ask is, in countries that block Signal, right? So let's say their method of blocking is to maybe do DNS poisoning or do something like that. Is it really just a rat and mouse game between how many proxy servers you can put up and how many they can ban when they discover that it's a proxy server? Or is there a more foolproof method around that?
I mean, this is something that I don't like to talk about because I don't like to really sort of, or I'm not going to diagram the methods we use sort of on a live screen, I guess is the answer there. But hypothetically, there are a lot of methods, right? There's sort of, masking it in encrypted traffic and using protocols that, encrypt that traffic that is, say like Cloudflare just announced, right? There is, domain fronting, which could be a method, but it is, ultimately like, it's always going to be a cat and mouse game because these sort of, there are adversaries there, each of which has its own affordances, and they're trying to use those to, in our case, ensure that people have the human right to private communication, and in, authoritarian government's case, to ensure that they don't.
Yep.
Excuse me. I'm here at the back.
Sorry, it's all coming from the same place
Yeah,
on the
right.
speaker.
So my question is a little more broader than the working of Signal. So what is your opinion on the fact that, what the individual wants is not what society may need? For example, suppose I'm a farmer and I have pests invading my crops and I'd like to kill them. I'd like to make sure that my crops are not harmed. But what's good for me is not necessarily what's good for the environment. In that line, privacy, that it may be good for me. It may not be good in the whole spectrum when you consider the fact that you require surveillance to monitor. Now, for example, you have 1 crore people living in the city, and it is unviable to have police at every junction. So you have cameras, you have AI systems that do this. Of course, now this can be used maliciously. So I can be tracked wherever I go and they can build a profile on me. So what are your views? It's a general open question. What are your views on completely autonomous systems used for surveillance? And for example, now would you all be open to having an unencrypted data if a government came forward with an open autonomous system that analyzes, scans this and flags accounts?
Oh, absolutely not. No. Yeah, and I think, yeah, we would never put a backdoor in our encryption or undermine our privacy commitments in any way. And I think just on a comment on your question, you were using the term you a lot, but I think we need to be really specific about the you we're talking about.
I mean, Signal as a team, how open are you all to...
Oh, absolutely not open at all. We're closed. Closed AF.
Hi. So I think this might have come up previously as well, but India's IT rules require a couple of things. They have provisions, one, for a first originator of the message, plus it also requires you to, as a company, to have a nodal officer for grievance as well as for, for other requirements. Is this something they've asked you to comply with? Is this something you're in compliance of? Is there any sort of struggle over there? Because there have been legal challenges as well, on both of those things.
So the way the Signal protocol works, our end-to-end encryption, it's not possible to do traceability. Yeah, we are not, so we don't meet the user thresholds for that to be a requirement at this moment, as far as I'm aware, yeah.
Yes, so what are you doing to increase the number of users and thus gain more leverage? I mean, what are the ways in which, given that the opportunities and the network effects don't benefit you, so the question is how much can you grow and make sure that, there's a backward push?
I think that's up to us as users. We need to get our friends on it.
Yeah, any best practices you've figured out, because the challenge has always been from a social perspective to sort of convince people around you to move from WhatsApp to Signal. So.
Folks, maintenance note, Meredith's giving other talk downstairs, so even she has to get out.
Yeah, thank you, because I would do this all night. That's my nature. I think, in a sense, you just demonstrated why a brand new app with no one on it couldn't succeed in an environment where the market is saturated. We do see people moving to Signal when there's a sort of precipitating event. So a political crisis, if WhatsApp sort of stripped its encryption, we would probably see people moving to Signal, I would say en masse, when in January 2021, when WhatsApp changed its terms of service to share data with Facebook. You saw, Signal was, and John reminded me of this the other day, but Signal was the top downloaded app for about a month in 70 countries. So I think it's, no one can switch to a communications app alone. They need their friends, and the point of an app is to be able to communicate with your friends, not to prove your ideological commitment to privacy. So this is why we go out of the way to make it as easy to use. We add stories, we add stickers, like all the cryptographers complain, we don't care. We want, the kid who's 14 to have fun on it and want to stay on it because you want privacy. you need it, not when there's a crisis. But we see people switch when there's a community that they care about that decides to switch together. So it's your union, it's your football club, it's a city that's just learned that something happening that is surveillance or threatening, and that's generally the pattern that we see, and we try to be ready for those switches.
Thank you. Jun, any closing comments? You have not spoken at all in this entire session. Okay, thanks everyone for being here. I'm sure there was never-ending stream of questions, but Meredith's going downstairs for another talk. It's going to be on AI and the AI economy. So you could all just walk down there. That's a bigger room. You don't have to sit outside. We'll have space over there. Thank you, everyone.